And the questions are already coming, I see.
Yes.
Yes, and we are ready. Would you like to start, Sana?
Yes, thank you, Marwa.
You're welcome.
On behalf of the Education USA West Bank team, I would like to welcome everyone who's joining us today. We are live streaming the session on our Facebook page, and we're also delighted to welcome our advising centers in Egypt, Qatar, and Morocco, who are also live streaming this session for their respective audiences. Our session today is titled Graduate Study in the US. Have your questions answered by admissions experts. A warm welcome to our guest speakers, Marcia Frankton, Director of the International Outreach and Admission at Valparaiso University, Michael Wilhelm, Associate Vice Chancellor, International Programs, and Stephen Hill, Associate Professor of Business Analytics, Director, MS Business Analytics Program, from both from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Our presenters will first share a brief overview about graduate study in the US, and we'll then open the floor to answer our audience questions. For those of you who are joining us, joining Education USA virtual sessions for the first time, my colleague Marwa will provide a brief introduction about Education USA. Marwa?
Thank you so much, Sana, for the introduction. Again, hi everyone, welcome to our session. My name is Marwa Shille, and I work with the Education USA Advising Center based at the Amid East office in Ramallah. I just want to tell you briefly about Education USA and about our free services. So Education USA is a US Department of State network. There are more than 550 advisors in over 178 countries and territories. Our mission is to help students who are interested in studying in the United States. Of course, our Education USA Advising Center, we have different activities that we conduct throughout the year. We have our in-center activities where we meet with different students for individual consultations, specific sessions for our cohorts, and we also have sessions on specific topics. Of course, we have also our outreach sessions where we visit different high schools, universities, and local institutions. Also, because of the COVID-19 situation, the pandemic, since March, all of our services and activities have been virtual. And so we have been doing only virtual advising, and we have been connecting with our audiences online. So for the Education USA, we always recommend our students and our prospective applicants to follow the 5 steps to US study if you want to apply to different universities and colleges in the US. Of course, the first step, you need to research your options. You need to find the best fit university or college or program. You also need to finance your studies, which is your second step. You need to understand the total cost of your program and how are you going to pay for these costs. And then the third step, you need to understand the application folder and the different requirements that you should be working on. After you receive an admission and offer and you accept it, hopefully you need to apply for your student visa as an international student. And then your fifth and final step is to prepare for your departure. On the Education USA website, you can find detailed information about the 5 steps that I just mentioned. And at the same time, there's a specific section where you will find information and updates on like exchange programs and updates about the international student visa and updates from the Department of Homeland Security. Also on the Education USA website, we have a special section. It's called Special Opportunities and Financial Aid, where a number of US higher education institutions share their scholarship opportunities for international students. And you can actually filter your options based on your level of study and also the location of the university or college. If you want to know more about our services, make sure that you follow us on our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Also, you can contact us via email at ramallah@educationusa.org if you have any follow-up questions after this session. If you are not from our country, please make sure that you go to the Education USA website and you can find the nearest advising center in your city or country. If you have any questions during the session, please make sure to write them in the chat box. If you are watching this on Facebook, please write your questions in the comments section. And now I'm going to hand it over to our presenters for today.
So I want to point out that I have a mere master's. The two gentlemen I'm presenting with, I believe Stephen and Michael both have PhDs. Or do you have an EDD, Michael?
I almost have an EDD, so I can give them firsthand, literal day-to-day.
So we got a master's,
experience.
almost EDD, and a PhD. So you have those different perspectives on the different graduate programs in the United States. We have over probably 3,000 institutes in the United States that give graduate programs. We're going to try to go through these slides as quick as possible. This is not about us talking. This is about us answering your questions today. I recently did a presentation in MENA, and there were so many questions. So we wanted to have this outlet for you guys just to answer questions. I have a bachelor's in Middle Eastern Studies. I spent a lot of times in the Middle East. I studied at the University of Jordan briefly, and my master's is in international education, and it's a professional master's. So as there are many diverse universities in the United States, there are many diverse programs. There are professional masters and there are research masters. Professional masters, the purpose of these masters is, yes, for you to increase your education, but it's more geared to you getting a job and getting skills versus necessarily doing research. So that's the first kind of master's we'll talk is a professional master's. And that could be a master's MS, which has more of a science focus, or a master's of art, which maybe has, a more liberal arts, social studies, social science background. But these are really geared. And can you get a PhD after MS or MA? Yes, but it'd be more challenging because a lot of schools would want you to have a lot of times to have that research published background. Next slide. These are different kinds of examples of masters, professional masters, some from Valparaiso, some from University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And the ones that have stars means they're STEM masters. The guys forgot to do STEM on some of them. They're MS at CIS, computer sciences, STEM masters. Any of your other ones, guys? Business analytics is STEM?
Business analytics is not because of our delivery format of purely online.
Sorry. University of North Carolina, Masters in Computer Science, I think is the only STEM one listed there. STEM might be important to you if you are looking to work for 3 years after your degree. If you pick a degree that has a STEM designation, that means you would be able to work for 3 years after your degree. STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. Our master's in International Economics and Finance is STEM. And you're probably going, why is it STEM? Has lots of math in it. And that's why I'm afraid of that degree. I'm afraid of math. So it could be a thing that you might think is social science, but when they dive into it, what is the coursework really of that degree? Next slide. So you might be looking for a research master's in MS. Another thing about the professional masters, there are very few graduate assistantships for those for the professional masters. Scholarships are more common in that background. Now, when you move into a research master's degree, you're often leading to a PhD program. And sometimes you apply directly to that PhD program, but we'll talk about that later, and you get the master's along the way. It's very heavily research design degree. You will be probably trying to get published. It's more doing versus yes, you are getting skills, but it's more looking at the why, and what is behind that degree. Now, these are degrees. A research master's often might have a assistantship related to it. It could be a research assistantship, a teaching assistantship, but they often have assistantships associated with them. So you guys have to decide what kind of program for you. I'm going to let the gentleman talk about PhDs a little bit and how those work.
So to continue the theme that Marcy has introduced for you all, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you again for joining us. We're glad to have the opportunity to speak to everyone, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end. Marcy talked about two different types of master's programs, the professional and the research-driven master's degree, typically a 2-year program in the US as opposed to a 1-year degree elsewhere in many places in the world. And Dr. Hill and I are going to talk a little bit about what is known as the terminal degree in most disciplines, the PhD, the Doctor of Philosophy. It is the highest postgraduate degree that can be achieved at universities around the world. And after a very competitive process that Stephen can certainly answer questions about, those who are awarded with a PhD typically are credentialed to be able to teach or have a research position at a university in the US or around the world. It is a research-driven doctorate or a course-driven doctoral studies program with a heavy research component, typically taking between 3 to 5 years. Stephen, would you mind sharing the discipline where you received the terminal degree and how long it took you, just as an example?
Sure. So my PhD took 4 years. So I started in 2004 and finished in 2008. It is absolutely as Michael mentioned, it is a research-focused, research-driven degree. There's typically coursework for a component of the degree. So I believe it was maybe 2.5 years of courses. And then the last year or year and a half of the program, it was solely dedicated to working on a large-scale research project with the anticipation that that is publishable research, and that is research that can assist you in getting a job. Now, there are a couple of paths depending on the type of program you find yourself in. I was in operations management, which is a business degree, but is a very quantitative and very technical business degree. Lots of math, Marcy. And so most people in that degree program were going to find themselves working in an academic role, and so teaching at a university, although there are of course opportunities in industry as well for people with PhDs. But I think for most people that are in a PhD program, and again, this is a generalization, but for most people in a PhD program, the goal is probably to work in academics.
Thank you
Did
very
you go
much.
directly from your bachelor's, or did you?
That's great. So I'm a unusual case. I actually got a master. My undergraduate was in engineering, and I got a master's in engineering, and then switched to business. So along the way, and again, you mentioned this earlier, but maybe Michael did. It's pretty common to have a master's degree embedded within the PhD program. So as I completed my 4 years of my PhD program, I also received a master's in operations management. It was kind of a buy one, get one free almost, kind of along the way. So that's really pretty common. But I did not have significant work experience. So it was pretty linear. I moved from my bachelor's to my master's in engineering straight into my PhD in business. So I could have skipped the master's in civil engineering and saved myself a couple of years, but you live, you learn. So, but it is, I have had students at UNC Wilmington, for example, who have applied directly to PhD programs for NC State, for example, or other local institutions that have come straight from a bachelor's in economics or operations management or business analytics and straight into a PhD program.
Thanks, Stephen, very, very much. And again, to continue on the slide just for a minute, Stephen mentioned that his terminal degree, his PhD, is in operations management, as is illustrated on the slide. A very, very common way to share the discipline as part of a bio or when you're introducing yourself or just showing off around the office. Marcy mentioned earlier, I'm on a slightly different path. Stephen mentioned a linear progression, right? From the bachelor's program to the master's directly into the PhD. And if you can do that, if you know early on in your professional or academic career that you want to pursue that terminal degree, it's definitely the best way to go. At the advanced age that I will not share with you that I have attained in life, I am in the final stages of completing the EDD, the Doctorate in Education, a slightly less research based degree, I guess, in the common vernacular, although just finishing the dissertation now, it certainly doesn't feel that way. Typically, as Dr. Hill mentioned, you've got a combination of intensive coursework over about a 2-year period, and then a year to a year and a half to complete the dissertation. And most folks with the EDD would talk about also a doctorate in education leadership, a doctorate in curriculum and instruction, for example. Just to add what Stephen and Marcy shared about the very, very end of the wording on the slide. In some cases, it is already possible to pursue a PhD after achieving that bachelor's degree. And from what we've seen in higher ed in the US over the last 10 or 15 years, it's becoming more and more and more common. In many degree specializations, the master's is almost ceasing to exist. And we'll talk a little bit about that in an upcoming slide. Marwa, please. Next slide. So really, really quickly, what to know about applying to graduate school, whether you're talking about the research master's, the professional master's, or some type of a terminal doctoral program. Typically, although not in all cases, you're going to have a standardized exam that most of you don't want to take, to be perfectly frank. As long as Marcy and I have been working in and around undergraduate and graduate admissions, by far, this is the most frequent question. Maybe number 2, right? Funding.
And I have good news. At Valpo, we do not require any of those exams. But I know I forgot the slide. The TOEFL and IELTS we do require.
Yeah, so Marcy mentioned the TOEFL or the IELTS or Duolingo. You're definitely going to need to prove English proficiency. But many programs are whether they be masters, certainly, maybe the occasional doctoral program, although far fewer. They're doing away with these standardized tests. Maybe it could be replaced by work experience, for example. If you've had 5 or 10 years of professional work experience, that would meet the threshold. The examples that are provided in the slide, the GRE, the Graduate Record Examination, is kind of a general test. I saw the question already in the chat about the SAT. For lack of a better characterization, the GRE is the graduate equivalent of the SAT. It serves as an entry exam, an entrance exam for graduate study. The GMAT is typically taken by students preparing for a professional master's in a business discipline. It's a very, very unique test with very creative and interesting questions developed really only for that exam to try to gauge your ability to succeed in a graduate business discipline. And Stephen may be able to share some personal experience with that exam as well. And the LSAT, of course, is for admission to law school. And in my experience, this exam is going to be required for a graduate degree in law, which is how it works in the United States, as opposed to an undergraduate 5 or 6 year progression that you might see in the UK or elsewhere around the world. Any comments, Stephen, on any or all of those exams?
I was going to jump in for a moment. First of all, as Michael mentioned, these are tests that are not a lot of fun. Don't feel bad. I took the GRE 2 times. Don't feel bad if you end up having to take an exam more than once. I did not prepare for the GRE. I just went and took it, and it was a big mistake. So if you have the ability to find practice exams, if you have the ability to prepare in some way, that can help a lot. The second thing is, when you look at the testing requirements, you're going to see a lot of variance from program to program, even within universities. For example, within the business school at UNC Wilmington, different programs will have different admission requirements related to testing. So for example, my master's in business analytics program, we don't require that. We don't require a test. We don't require a GRE or a GMAT or an LSAT or anything like that. but our friends in the finance department, they do. So it can vary. And I think that's a good theme sort of across all of this, is pay particular attention to those requirements when you look at each university, because there can be a lot of diversity in those requirements. They can be very different. And when you apply, it's important to pay very close attention to those things. As you're preparing a cover letter, for example, if you're, one thing I see a lot when people are applying to my program is it's very clear that the student is applying to, let's say, 10 different programs, and they're trying to use the same cover letter, for example, for 10 different programs. And I've even seen students make a mistake and put the wrong name of the university, for example. They're applying to UNC Wilmington and they put Valparaiso, for example, because they're also applying there. So pay close attention. The details matter. To me, that's one of the key things. And it's when I'm evaluating admission, when I'm evaluating a student for admission is, we have a very detail-oriented program. So were they detail-oriented in the application process?
Thanks, Stephen, very much. And to continue that theme from the second bullet, this notion that networking is key. Networking or learning about the program, learning about the professors, learning about who can serve as a reference for you. As Stephen mentioned, the detail is very, 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 very important here. You've got to select people that will support you positively around the reference process. And then also very, very good advice from Stephen around the personal statement and the resume and CV. Remember that Marcy introduced the research-driven masters, and Stephen introduced the notion of a research-driven PhD program. If you are applying to these programs with a very, very heavy research experience upcoming, if you have research already, you want that to be obviously included in your personal statement and highlighted in your resume and your CV. In many cases, especially when you're applying for funding, you want to be able to demonstrate to the faculty member, right? Stephen mentioned that he's going to look at these applications as faculty director. You want to be able to demonstrate to them that you can. Sorry?
Next slide talks about the 2 steps.
No, I understand. Thank you. Stephen was highlighting the fact that you want to be able to demonstrate that you can contribute to the faculty members in that department in terms of the research enterprise and research proposals, because everything that you are doing means it's something that a faculty member will not have to do. And they like that very, very, very much when you can demonstrate that up front, that you can really contribute. Finally, the last bullet, I'll just say one thing. You'll get a lot of advice from a lot of admissions counselors when you say, how do I know what program to join? Can I write directly to the professors? Will they help me through the process? You're going to get a lot of advice from folks that say, yes, do some research on the website, find a professor that whose research interest dovetails perfectly with yours, and then reach out to them, and they'll send you an immediate response by email, 3 or 4 pages detailing everything that you have to do. And if you see the look on Stephen's face, Stephen may do that because he's very responsive. The average faculty member will not. They're very busy. They have other stuff they like to do. I'll maybe leave that where it is, right there. We talked about variance around the entry requirements. There's also a lot of variance when it comes to faculty. If you have met and interacted with someone like Marcy or myself or anybody, a representative from a U.S. university, someone from the international office or from the admissions office, undergraduate or graduate, they can serve as a very, very effective point of entree with that faculty member or with the department to make sure that you can get some kind of a response. So if you're having trouble locating a faculty member or locating contact information, reach out to the person that you met at the virtual fair, an on-the-ground fair, or at an advising appointment, for example, in an Education USA office in Ramallah, in Rabat, in Qatar, in Cairo. And follow up with them. We take that very, very seriously because it is the one point of focus for our jobs. Whereas again, for many faculty, they're pulled in 100 different directions. Next slide, please, Marla. This is the slide that Marcy was alluding to, and you've seen already Stephen talk about it, and Marcy and I talk about the other side. When you're dealing with graduate admissions, it is very, very commonly a two-step process. One step from the central graduate office is the logistical piece, right? The requirement piece. Do you meet the minimum requirements? Do you have the grades? Did you submit your personal statement? Did you get your letters from references? Do you have a degree in a discipline that makes sense? Once that all that stuff is tabulated and you've completed and collated and you've completed the application process, then that file typically goes out to the faculty director like Stephen Hill in the discipline to determine, do we want this student to come into the program? Do they have the right background? Are they a good fit for the program? Do they represent add to the diversity of the student pool? Does your research assignment align with the professor or the program? Really, really, really important questions. Stephen, anything else you look at when my wife sends you those application files?
Absolutely, and I won't take but just a second. But one thing I would say is, when it says, do you meet the minimum requirements? You will find, and I keep using the word variance and diversity, you will find variance and diversity about how strict a university and even down to the program level is about minimum requirements. I have seen some universities where it's a long list of things, and if you miss even one of those things, you can forget, it's not going to happen. You're not going to be admitted to the program. You're never going to get past the first filter. You're going to be stopped at the graduate office. The application's going to end. However, there are other programs. I mean, my program, for example, is an example, and I know some within the business school at UNC Wilmington is, if we require a certain grade point average, we're somewhat flexible about that. So you can find programs that will, don't be scared because you see don't be concerned because you see a program that says we have these specific entry requirements. It is possible in some situations, again, this varies across universities and across programs, is there may be opportunities for exceptions. If you have considerable work experience. Someone asked a question in the chat, I'm an older student, to me, seeing an older student is oftentimes a great thing because they're a student that has some life and work experience perhaps that a younger student might not. And so I would be willing to look at an older student differently perhaps because of their experiences than I would a student that is straight out of a bachelor's degree, for example, when it comes to evaluating them based upon those minimum requirements. So again, some programs, they're going to be very strict and it's going to, that's just the way it is. Other programs are going to be more flexible perhaps. And so it's worth asking, it's worth reaching out to a graduate program office. It's worth reaching out to a faculty member and saying, I don't quite meet your requirements. I'm very close. Should I still apply? And we evaluate Michael's wife works in our graduate programs office. And so I interact with her all the time about students that are sort of on the border. They're very close. And so we talk about, should we ask them to pursue the application process? And in most times we do.
But the one point that I will reinforce, and I agree with everything that Dr. Hill just said, is if in order for my wife and for Stephen to have the opportunity to make that exception or to entertain that application that is just below the 3.4 that is recommended as a grade point average, you must have the application complete. In my experience, and again, I won't speak for Valparaiso, but in my experience dealing with folks around the country where I've worked in the past, graduate school officers, graduate school administrative assistants, graduate school deans are not known as the most flexible of individuals, right? Faculty can be, department chairs can be, faculty directors can be, but for that application to make it out of the Central Graduate School into the hands of the faculty director so that Stephen can apply some of this flexibility that he is so famous for, you've got to have the application complete, okay? So make sure you've ticked all of those boxes around the personal statement, the references, the application, the English proficiency, and the standardized test score if it's required. Marcy, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, that's totally true. That, we're at Valparaiso in general, we're looking for a 3.0 out of 4. But if you have a 2.8 and you've been working at Amazon in Qatar for 3 years, that has a lot of weight. The other thing I want to point out is in America, your bachelor's and master's don't always have to be the same. Look at Stephen here. He started out as an engineer and he went down a different path for his PhD. There are some flexibility. For instance, I used to do MBA admissions all the time and business admissions. We love the engineers because they had the math background, but we want them to have some work experience so they can talk about working in a professional setting. So it really, more than anything else, graduate school is a holistic review. Now, if you don't have the English score, I think all our programs require some English qualification, unless you've done your bachelor's in an English speaking country. So we need some English qualification. But, when we say 3.0, it's not an absolute. Now, don't try to send, as like a 2.2. That's a big gap. But we are really looking at a holistic review. Those statement of purposes are really important. Those letters of recommendation are really important. I had a student who had a really high GPA, but they had the worst letters of recommendations. And this is for a professional master's, and they were not selected for the program. We want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So we're at about a half-hour point right now. Anything else, or should we move to questions?
I say we follow the slide.
Thank
Right,
you
Marla?
so much. Yes, thank you so much for sharing your input and experiences. And thank you so much also for answering some of the questions that our audience asked at the beginning. So I just typed some of the questions that we received from the registrants. And I think we can start with the third question, since Michael answered the first two questions. So I know that some colleges and universities have a conditional admission for a bachelor's degree. Does that apply for master's? If yes, can you give me some examples?
I can give you an example. We certainly do that in our business analytics program. I mean, again, it's like I said, it varies. It's going to vary by program and by school. For example, we require a stats that you had some statistics experience, whether it's in a course or work or whatever the case might be. And if that experience is perhaps not up to our expectations when we're evaluating you as a student, we may admit you conditionally on the condition that you complete a statistics course that we have selected, or we give you some remedial training for opportunities, for example, in statistics. The same thing happens when we have applicants that are not familiar with business. Maybe they have a degree that was in psychology or in history or something like that. I love history and psychology students. If they have some quantitative skills, come to my program. It's amazing. It's great because they add a unique diversity to the program, but they do need to have some basic background in business, some terminology, some definitions, some just basic things. And so we will point them to some remedial courses related to business that they can run through very quickly and kind of come up to speed and be prepared for the program.
And another thing is sometimes a student will not have the required English requirement at the time of application. Some schools have English as a second language programs on their campus. Sometime I've given admissions to a student who's planning on going to ELS or doing some additional English studies, but they will not be able to enter the US if English is the requirement usually, or at least join our university versus some of those other programs where they're missing the stats course or basic courses like that.
And many times, just so you can be familiar with the distinction between what Stephen is talking about and what Marcy is talking about, typically if it's an academic issue or if it's a discipline-driven issue, the business example that Stephen gave, or a lack of stats, those can be deemed centrally from the graduate school provisional admission. Right, so you need to come and you need to meet this provision. Very, very commonly in the parlance of what Marcy is talking about, when the provision, if you will, is the English proficiency, we typically refer to that in admissions as conditional admission. Back to the question that was asked, and unlike undergraduate, the undergraduate application experience that you referenced in the question, where a university typically would give a blanket conditional admission for undergrad because those decisions are made centrally. At the graduate level, a university might be able to offer conditional acceptance around English proficiency only in some academic disciplines. Since the graduate process, as you just saw illustrated, is so decentralized, right? First it comes in, then it goes out to the department for admission. Some departments, for example, the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, the MBA program will accept conditional applicants, right? They'll accept a student who comes and then needs to get 79 or 85 or whatever on the TOEFL before they progress. And some departments simply do not want to do that. They want to see English proficiency met up front, and they will not enter into any type of conditional agreement. So I know it's not the answer that you're looking for, but again, variance comes into play. If you don't see what you are looking for around a graduate conditional acceptance at one university, you should certainly check one of the others on your list, because the opportunities might be better there in that discipline. Again, depending on the relationship between admissions, the international office, the ESL program, whether it's on campus or off, and any kind of negotiation that has taken place with the academic discipline.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, what are some of the differences in job prospects between PhD and master's?
I would say I'll jump in, I guess, having been through both of those processes. Some people, I think you'll hear sometimes in a PhD program that a PhD can restrict your job opportunities a bit, in that you may become somewhat, the word they often use is overqualified for some positions. So I think someone asked a similar question in the chat, maybe, is that, you know, again, I think most of the people that go through a PhD program are heading towards academia, but there are a wealth of opportunities out there in industry as well, especially, you know, if you look at Silicon Valley, for example, you know, if you look at, you know, Airbnb, Google, Amazon, you know, the Zillow, Tesla, whatever the case might be, they're hiring PhDs. You know, they're hiring, exactly. Yeah, that's perfect. Those are perfect examples. They're hiring PhDs, but it's a much narrower, I think it's a much narrower kind of market and much, much more competitive. Even with a PhD, there's the availability of those positions in industry. It can be difficult. For me, again, in my personal experience was just, I'm doing a PhD because I want to be a professor. And that's the only real path to be a tenured, you know, tenure track faculty member at a large university.
My sister has 3 masters and is actually thinking of getting a law degree. She works in the corporate world, and she has thought about getting a PhD, but she was actually told in the corporate world, and she's much more of a scientist. She has public health. Well, she has one MBA, but she was told not to get a PhD, that you probably would be unhireable. So they said, go get more masters. Don't get a PhD, because the corporate world will not look favorably on you. They'll think you're too research orientated. And like I said, the research place has places like Amazon loves doing research, pharmaceutical companies, things are there. So depending on where you are lining in the field, if you have a PhD in computer science, you know, it could be on either edge there. So it depends which way.
I think it's sometimes you can almost look at a master's as an extension, and I use this word kind of carefully, as an extension or specialization of what you studied in your bachelor's degree. You know, it's, you enjoyed business analytics as an undergraduate student, and now you want more. Or you got a degree in electrical engineering, I saw someone in the chat, and you wanted to learn more about business, so that you've got quantitative skills. Maybe you've been working your way in a company for a long time, or for, you know, 5-10 years, and you want to be a manager, for example. So it's a natural step to step into an MBA, for example, in that kind of situation, where the PhD is a whole different game.
Yes, thank you so much. Our next question, are there any differences in the applications, such as the testing requirements or the availability of funding, that have changed due to the pandemic?
Great question.
My school doesn't require the GRE or GMAT, so that hasn't changed. We are now taking there's an IELTS online that we're taking that. We've always been really flexible in how we receive the material, so we're taking them scanned. But my undergrad program at Valparaiso is taking Duolingo, but the grad school is still not open to taking Duolingo. Are you guys taking Duolingo?
We are. We've taken it at the undergraduate level for the past 2 years, and just now, because of the impact of the pandemic, even with the online offerings from TOEFL and IELTS, the graduate school has formalized its requirement as well.
So Duolingo is an English exam. That's the cheapest English exam. I don't work for Duolingo, but it's only $50. You can do it anywhere you have reliable internet. They don't charge you to send it to each school. So that is a nice option. So when students say, oh, I can't take an exam, we go, yeah, you can.
Yes, our next question. If my employer is weak in English and I want him to write a recommendation letter, what should I do?
Outstanding question. Dr. Hill?
So, well, there's a couple of answers to that. And I've seen this happen a couple of times in different forms. First of all, my concern is not necessarily about your employer's English skills. My concern is about your English skills. I will be honest with you. I'm going to say this personally and not as a representative of all graduate programs. I am almost less concerned about the content of the recommendation letter at times than I am about who it came from.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's me, other people feel differently about that. Okay, so let me be clear about that. So if your employer, your manager who you've worked with for 5 or 10 years, writes a letter and says that you are an excellent person and you're going to be a great graduate student, and the English isn't perfect, I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I have had them submitted in a foreign language before, which is a bit more challenging. For example, I had someone submit a letter, I think one time in German or something, which I would advise not doing that. Don't submit it in a foreign language. Please submit it in English. Fortunately, I have a colleague in my department who is fluent in German. So I was able to just walk over to her office and say, hey, can you tell me what this says? And we were good. But I think, like I said, it's not the employer, it's you. It's you that we're evaluating. So if I get a letter from a president at a bank, in Cairo, for example, and the letter in the English is not perfect, that's fine. It's okay. It's you that we're worried about.
Sometimes we'll get it in Arabic and English at the same time.
Yeah, that happens
too. The student has translated to English, and I usually can find someone to make sure they're aligning enough much to it.
That's totally reasonable. Yeah,
that's totally reasonable. Or if it's submitted electronically, we could use Google Translate these days.
Exactly.
And again, I don't want to speak on behalf of the U.S. Department of State or Education and Cultural Affairs, or certainly Education USA or Ramallah or any of the other 3 countries represented here today. But very, very commonly in my experience with Education USA advisors in the past, they can offer some type of a certified original, transcript kind of stamp, or do a rudimentary translation if you absolutely can't find it anywhere else, or certainly recommend some type of a local notary to validate that this is a translation into English, and something that is pretty reasonable. I'm sure that if worse came to worse, Marwa and Sana could help you, as could the other advisors represented from the centers here this evening.
Yes, that's true, Michael. We have a few cases throughout the year where applicants reach out to us and we help them in terms of the translation and the recommendation letters. We have a question about research opportunities. If there are not many opportunities for research in my country, what suggestions do you have to expand my opportunities and improve my overall profile to pursue a PhD?
I feel like Marcy, I have an answer, but Marcy, I feel like I'm dominating, so I didn't want.
I would probably say then maybe you are one of the people who might want to apply to a master's first, versus trying to do the master PhD program. But the other part of that is your statement of purpose. Your statement of purpose is the time for you to explain who you are, what you're coming from and what you want to do. So that could be a time for you to explain, this is where I am, this is the opportunities. Stephen?
And I think people will recognize, in general, will recognize constraints that may be on you. That you come from in a part of the world, or whatever the case might be, where those opportunities may be difficult. Fortunately, living in sort of the connected world in which we live, there are a variety of resources out there for you to develop an individual research project that shows potential. And it's maybe not a full-fledged, something that you would take and go publish in a journal or something like that. But I encourage my students at all levels, whether they're American students, it doesn't matter, is being able to demonstrate that competency often happens outside of the classroom. And so doesn't always happen in a course. So for example, for business analytics, which again is my sort of specialty area, there are so many online examples through websites like Kaggle or other places like that, where you can find projects to work on. And these are not unique, these are other people are going to be working on them. And, this is not a traditional sort of research project. But if I had a student that said, where I live, we don't have that many research opportunities, but I went to this website, I found this data set, and I developed this analysis, and I learned maybe a little bit of coding along the way and developed some visualizations and fun things like that, that's really, really, really impressive. So to see that, you are in a potential spot where that opportunity may not exist, and then knowing that you went out and found that opportunity because they do exist online, that's to me, that's really, really good. That would make me pretty excited about a student.
Now,
back to the context of the previous question as well. This is one thing here at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington and other sister schools in the University of North Carolina system. International offices have been very proactive around pairing faculty with international students to allow international students to have an online experience assisting the faculty member in research during the pandemic, when some of this stuff is not able, of course, to take place face-to-face. The second thing that I would mention, many of you in your undergraduate programs around the world have a thesis requirement to complete that undergraduate degree, even if it's not very, very heavily research driven in terms of in a laboratory with beakers and test tubes and Bunsen burners, right? You've demonstrated that you've done some research and produced something representative of your entire undergraduate career. If you had a little mini dissertation or a thesis as part of the undergraduate requirement, or a master's that you've done in the home country, make sure that that is very heavily promoted in the letter and on the CV or resume.
and the one last thing I would say to this, and then I think we better move on, is PhDs, if it's a fully funded PhD, they'll be more picky. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but it's very much like they're almost looking for a match, like a marriage match. They're looking for someone who has the skills to help advance their research. And so a PhD, especially a fully funded PhD where they're paying you to study and paying you to work in their lab, will probably be more picky. And so that's why the master's might give you that, as a stepping stone, might give you that opportunity if you did a master's in the United States.
Again, thank you so much for your input. Are there any joint programs where I can complete my master's and PhD? And are these programs more competitive?
I think it's pretty well, I can again speak from my experience. I would say it is becoming more common, if it is not sort of the norm, for a master's and PhD to go hand in hand. If you are accepted to a PhD program, like in my case, and in several of my students that have graduated from our university and have gone on to PhDs, they've gotten the master's as part of the PhD program. So I think that combined program is probably pretty common. I think you'll see less and less of people going like I did, which was weird, to go get a master's degree and then go back again separately from everything else, and then go back and do another master's degree and a PhD all in one. That was sort of unusual. That's how I ended up with 2 masters. Like I said before, I probably didn't need the first one. I probably could have just gone straight into the PhD program and have been fine. But yeah, I think that's pretty common, and it's something, it's something to ask. But I think most of the programs that I have seen, at least in my field and in, in business, for example, that's a really common thing to receive a Master of Science degree, and it's a research focused degree on the way as you do your PhD.
And remember, Stephen did his bachelor's in engineering, and ultimately his PhD was in data science, I believe, right?
Operation
management, but different fields of studies, and that is
and
possible.
Now I teach, so I did engineering, and then I did operations management, and now I teach business analytics. So I think it's a good example, because the core of that was the quantitative skills.
Yeah.
And so once you have that skill set, it's pretty easy to pivot to do one thing or the others. So if you have an engineering background, or if you have a computer science background or math or something like that, you're going to find programs that will have interest in you because of that quantitative skill set.
There's 2 questions I see about online study that I really want to answer.
Yes.
And I'm going to answer the quicker one first. Someone says, if I wanted to pursue an online master's, will I be eligible for OPT or CPT? So to get OPT or CPT, usually you have to have studied within the United States for 10 months or an academic year. And a perfect example of that is, so we have started a master's in our IT program that's called Start at Home, where you can do up to the program is 4 semesters or 2 years. And so you could do up to 2 semesters at home and then transition to our campus for the 2nd year. Because that would allow you to have that 10 months of OPT. There are some exceptions. CPT is internships while you're studying. There are some exceptions in the graduate programs that you can do CPT without 10 months, but you have to be located in the United States. Example of that is a master's in accounting. A lot of them require internships as part of the degree to graduate. But to get OPT, you have to have studied in the United States for at least 1 academic year. The question, anyone else to add to that? Okay, the question above that, does online distance technology make it easier for students to learn and interact with fellow students and professors? So I did my master as a low residence master's. So I went to campus 3 times in my 2-year degree. And for the longest time was 2 weeks. So a lot of graduate programs, a lot of the work is group projects. Not all, but a lot of them are group projects. So I was able to very much develop a relationship with my professors. I was very much able to develop relationships with my other students. And I was traveling all over the world. I'm usually outside the United States more than inside the United States. So it's really, things are really possible. And professors are working really hard to make things interactive, not to make it just a talking screen. I mean, Stephen's teaching, he could talk about this more, but it really is. And when I did it was prior to COVID, when I did my master's. But so it is very much possible to have that collaboration. And professors are still having office hours. They just might be through a video screen. That is something very big in the United States, is office hours. Professors and students meeting and just discussing their work and their dreams. So, that is definitely possible.
I would add to that. So the answer is, I think, absolutely yes. Through an online program, you can develop relationships with faculty, with students. Is it going to be a perfect, mirror of what you would do if you were face-to-face? Probably not. It's going to require more effort, both from the faculty member as well as from the student. So there's a 2-part thing there. One suggestion that I would have, and I've seen this with some of our competing analytics programs in other parts of America, is try to find out how many students will be in either a cohort with you or in a class with you. So for example, that's going to make a big difference. There is one very, very popular analytics program in the United States. I won't name names, but there's one very popular program that has thousands and thousands of students in it. And there's no way that you're going to be able to get that interaction with the faculty member at all. Zero. That faculty member probably won't even know who you are. Whereas with our program, and again, there are other programs like ours, I'm just using ours as an example, I have the opportunity, because the numbers are small enough, 25, 30, something like that, that I can learn something about the students. I can find out what they're interested in. I use tools like Slack all the time to engage with my students.
It's a
being
survey thing.
responsive. What's that?
They don't know what Slack is.
Oh, Slack is a industry standard, and at least in America, sort of chat tool, interactive chat tool that people use a lot in businesses here in the US. So instead of relying on email, it's more of a real-time engagement with the students. And so that, plus a lot of Zoom calls, plus a lot of Skype or whatever the case might be. But I could never do that if I had 500 students or 1,000
The
students.
important question is, when you're picking a program, especially for a master's, what is the average class size?
Right.
So that
And
is something when you're looking for a master's program, is an important question, or even a bachelor's or some.
And that's especially important for online.
Yes.
Face-to-face, you can get past part of that, because you can be a student that can kind of go out of your way to make sure to talk to a faculty member. It's easier that way. But online, it's really, really critical to find. And that's one thing, our program's been growing, but I've been trying to make sure as we do that we maintain that faculty student contact, because there's a lot of value in that it's value for me. I like to get to know the students, and there's value for the student, obviously, for career prospects and things like that.
Because once the professor knows you better, they're able to help you guide your studies. They're also help you to able to connect with research. They're also help you maybe able to connect you with future jobs.
Right.
That's why that interaction with the professor, besides learning from them, is very important.
Exactly.
And it is something that obviously you're here for a reason, but it is something that higher education in the United States is known for, right? That approachability, that ability to share ideas and bounce ideas off of professors, and the extracurricular experience, right? The student-centered approach that we take in the United States to great expense for our institutions. And I think Stephen and Marcy's points are well made. If you can't get that in some type of a very high volume, massive cohort master's program, then you're not really getting the full experience, and the responsibilities on the university to try to deliver that as much as they possibly can, and on the individual faculty.
Thank you again. We have another question. Are there more scholarships available for PhD or masters in certain fields, like the STEM fields? If yes, why?
I can answer the PhD part. PhD, yes, absolutely. I would, and again, I can only speak to my experience, but it was very uncommon to not be funded as a PhD student in a STEM-oriented field. And so again, I was in business, but I was in a very quantitative field of part of business. So everyone in my program, when I was at Alabama, the University of Alabama, everyone in my program was fully funded. Americans, people from other parts of the world, everyone was fully funded. That may not hold true in again, from my experience, that may be less likely to be true in non-STEM oriented fields. So you will find, I have colleagues, for example, that are in other parts of the university that are not as technical, and they may have had to pay some or all of the fees for their program, although there may be assistantships and things to defray some of that, but definitely in STEM. And it's simply just because of the demand. There's both a demand from the academic side for people that can be qualified educators in STEM oriented areas, and then of course there's going to be some demand, as we've talked about before, in industry for those types of practitioners as well.
There's also a lot of grants that professors bid on in the STEM field, and that's often how they are funding their students. The other way, besides being a graduate assistantship doing research, you could be a teaching assistant. So if you're teaching at a humongous university, like I used to work at Texas A&M and University of California, Davis, both of them had large teaching assistant programs. Many of them were international students, and they are teaching the basic math courses. They're teaching the basic biology courses. They are teaching or helping a professor teach those courses. So, that was and or even psychology and more in the social sciences. So if you're at a large research university pursuing a PhD, it is very common, if you don't have a research assistantship, is to have a teaching assistantship.
Yep.
And so basically, both of them, you are working for the university, but one is you're doing more research. The other one is you're doing more teaching. Like my friend got his PhD in biology and he didn't get aligned with a professor. So he was doing teaching assistantships and was able to support himself throughout his degree doing that, and graduated with very little debt. So it really depends on the size of the university, but PhDs, definitely the funding is more there. Masters is very limited. So when you're looking at a master's program, really look at the cost of living in that area. Where both of us live, very reasonable cost of living. Everyone wants to move to California. Well, you can't even get a 1-bedroom apartment in many parts of California for $1,000. Where in Valparaiso, you can get a 3-bedroom house for $1,000. So, if you are self-funding, look at the cost of living, look at the scholarships. And sometimes scholarships are not big. Like at Valparaiso, my scholarship is only $6,000 for grad programs over 2 years, but my tuition for the 2 years is only $24,000. So you could be paying $9,000 a year. So you have to really look at the big pictures as well. And also, if you're looking at a professional master's, look at what is their job placement rate. Valparaiso is around 97% for our overall campus, and we don't do PhDs separate. We have one PhD in nursing, but other than that, we don't do PhDs. So there really are professional masters. There's a lot of things to weigh when you're picking a program.
I would like to follow up with just one further thought on what Marcy and Stephen shared, and back to the original question as well. Marcy and Stephen detailed the 2 different paths to funding for not only PhD programs, but many master's programs that are STEM driven as well. And Marcy spoke to the size of the university, a big research institution, a big public university, typically having a lot of opportunities, to be perfectly frank, because it's a win for the student, but also a win for the university. There's a need for students to help faculty members do research. So graduate students get these research assistantships, right? On Saturday evenings when Dr. Hill is home watching a University of Alabama football game, but somebody's got to be out in the field picking pea plants, or someone's got to be in the office changing the tapes on the video computer machine, right? That's not going to be Dr. Hill, right? It's going to be
more like grading things online would be a more 2020 example.
I understand, but I'm talking about in a research discipline, right? Whether it's in ag or in engineering or whatever, there are tons of projects. And again, these things, it's more cost effective from the university to have a graduate student doing it than a faculty member who should be focused on either teaching or writing more grants to bring in more revenue for the institution. As Marcy said also, these basic STEM courses, be they mathematics, physics, biology, chemistry, whatever, every student in the university has to take that course. And if you are at Ohio State University in Columbus, where there are 70,000 students, that's a lot of courses of chemistry, biology, physics, and mathematics that need to be taught. Again, we can pay a faculty member like Dr. Hill $200,000 a year to teach a basic level chemistry class, or we can pay a graduate student from Qatar $20,000 or $12,000 or $15,000 a year to do the same thing for a couple of sections. So it is a win for the student, it is a win for the institution. Now, you might say, if you're sitting in Cairo or sitting in Alexandria or sitting in Fez right now, well, sure, they do that for US students, for American students, but why would they do that for me as an international student? I would also advocate that there is more of an opportunity for international students in these STEM disciplines in many institutions, because many US students will get an undergraduate degree and go to work immediately. Because in the STEM disciplines, in engineering, the pull of industry is so strong. If you get a degree in petroleum and natural gas engineering as a 22-year-old graduate with a bachelor's degree, you can go to work immediately earning $100,000 a year. Okay, it leaves opportunities for graduate students from abroad that want to come and do a master's or a PhD And they need students to do the work that we've talked about, whether doing research or teaching. There are tremendous opportunities for international students, and the more diverse your background, the more unique your background, the more the application stands out, and the more likely that you're going to get a hard look by that faculty director for not only admission to the program, but a research or a teaching assistantship opportunity.
I would say
I
when I
was-
worked at A&M, 70% of the graduate assistantships or teaching assistantships were international students. In fact, we actually had a program on campus which was specializing for or grad assistantships or teaching assistantships, teaching them how to teach an American curriculum and how to improve their English even in the classroom. So that's how big it was. And at Texas A&M, when I worked there, we had 65,000 total students on campus, larger than some towns in many places. So, you know, that was just the university campus. And the opportunities are there. They're not easy to get. They're picky. They're looking for the right person, but they are there.
I was the only American in my PhD program.
There you go.
You know, with a minority.
Again, Marcy's talking about Texas A&M, University of Alabama, West Virginia University, where I worked for 20 years. There are opportunities. If this is your dream and you've always wanted to come and you're very well qualified and very prepared and speak English well, don't let your concern about finances hold you back from applying, because universities, especially big public universities in these STEM areas, need your talents to either teach or do research, and they're willing to pay for it.
But you have to be well qualified, because it is you have to think of almost the PhD as a job interview, that you're trying to get a job, because you are getting a job.
We have a question about medicine. If a student completed his specialization for medicine in their home country and they want to work in the United States, will the student have to do a residency and specialization again in the US?
From my knowledge is that they have to take 2 different kinds of exams and they will do the residency again. The other option I've had is students sort of branch out. So I have a master's in public health and I have a master's in health administration at Valparaiso. And we have constantly have people who have a medical degree from overseas or a dental degree from overseas, and they do this. And this is more managed. Well, the public health is, you know, of course, public health, but the health administration is almost kind of a health degree / business degree. And they're more going into hospital management and things like that. But if they want to practice medicine in the United States, and they're a relatively fresh grad, probably less than 10 years, yes, they will have to do a residency again and take these exams that are really, really hard. At least
when you graduate from a medical school that's outside of the United States, you're what is known as a foreign medical graduate. As bad as that sounds, it's how you're typically deemed, and you need to focus on preparing for an exam that is called the USMLE. You can look that up on Google. There are various steps, right? There are standardized tests like knowledge-based steps, and then there's a bedside manner step as well. And you can use that qualification on the USMLE, maybe in the case of Qatar, in the case of Egypt, for example, with sponsorship, right, from the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, even a university like Qatar University in Doha, to find sponsorship for you to then come and pursue that residency over 2 or 3 years in a public university with a big medical school in the US. And then you could even go on to do a fellowship for further specialization. By taking that path in, you would be treated just like anyone else who has graduated from a medical school in the US. But back to Marcy's points and the points that Stephen has focused on throughout this, super, super, super competitive. And a good source of information for you might be at your own university if there's a medical school, in terms of any kind of arrangement that the dental school or the medical school has with a hospital or with a partner university in the United States to facilitate that residency placement. Dentistry, by far the most difficult when you're looking for endodontics or periodontics or some type of of fellowship or residency or master's degree specialization in dentistry. The slots are just so limited that you would probably be much better branching out the way Marcy mentioned before. If you're doing medicine and you don't mind pathology, if you're doing medicine and you don't mind a less competitive residency, then the opportunities are much more realistic.
The interesting thing is that path is easier than coming to the United States and trying to get accepted to medical school. It's easier to get the medical degree overseas, do the test qualification, and get a residency than, and I'm not saying it's easy, I'm saying it's easier than getting accepted into a medical school from a bachelor's overseas. There's a question I really want to answer. I saw someone ask that they said, do you support students with disability on your respective campuses? US law requires us to support students with disabilities. I mean, we embrace students with disabilities in the United States, and everything from if they need a translator in class. There's even ESL programs in the United States that will teach you American Sign Language. We had a blind exchange student last year from France, and we had someone help them with reading and helping make sure they think. So America is all about access and helping students with disabilities. So I thought that was a really important question. I really wanted to answer that one. Anyone else with disabilities?
No, I just would agree wholeheartedly. Without a doubt, I think as collectively, right, and in the aggregate, as an industry, right, as a service provider, U.S. higher education is better positioned to deal with any type of disability, be it something very mild or something very severe, compared to any other system I can think of around the world. Absolutely no concerns.
Each campus has an office that works with this and that helps with students with disabilities.
Thank you for
Any other
answering
burning
that
questions?
question. Yes, we have a question, just like a general question from one of the attendees. What is the most memorable application you have reviewed and why?
I've seen some statement of purposes that were really that sort of stuck with me, especially from Africa, talking about what they saw in their home place. And they really understood what the degree they were going to do was. It was actually for a data science degree, Stephen. And they had been working, in a clinic, and they were tracking malaria cases. And they said, I feel like I could do more if I had this degree. And they really related their home personal experience to what our degree was doing. And to me, that was very memorable, but I'm not, a professor.
I think the word there that probably describes what Marcy was saying is trajectory. So showing a path from where you are to where you want to be. And, maybe you've overcome some difficulties in the past. Maybe you have either way, it's fine. Some people come from different backgrounds, privileged backgrounds or unprivileged, less privileged backgrounds. Right. But seeing that trajectory of how your vision for how you think this degree is going to enable you to be where you want to be from where you are now. And so I've had specific examples of American students that have said these things. I never liked math, but I took a business analytics class, and now I'm seeing opportunities. I had one guy, he was working at a grocery store, fairly low wage sort of position, and he was immediately taking some of his skills from one course as an undergraduate and applying them at his work at the grocery store. Right. And that made him recognize that he wanted to go get a master's degree to have further study so that he could pursue different career opportunities. Stuff like that, it sticks with you. This guy's working in the seafood department at the grocery store and he's applying analytics when he doesn't really have to. It's not part of his job. Right. But he took that and now he wants to work into, you do that as a career or work in analytics as a career.
Yes, thank you so much. We have another question. I am a fresh graduate doctor and I started my online master degree in clinical research management in Arizona State University. I have a humbled research experience. I was involved in 11 publications as an author. How can I get a job in research in the US during my master's degree?
Well, you need to talk to professors. That if you're at ASU, I would seriously stalk professors online. Stalk means go online and see what they're doing and see what your publications, your research aligns with them and try to reach out to them. Presenting at conferences is another way to network and meet with professors and to possibly get assistantships. But it's really, really about making those connections. And you understanding what they're doing. I've seriously gone online and seen what a professor and read their research they've done and that what they've published. So and if it's you have to be genuine that your interests align with them and really try to make those connections. Stephen?
I would simply agree with that. I mean, and don't be discouraged if you don't hear back from a faculty member. I would say the reply rate you'll get is probably low.
And this is from a man with a PhD in operations management who lives and breathes statistics. He knows from where he speaks.
I don't teach in a PhD. We don't have a PhD program in business at UNCW, so I don't deal with applicants for a PhD program. But I know from my experience as a PhD student and working with my advisor and becoming close to him and having him talk about his experiences, you're going to get those people in those sort of institutions are going to get a lot of these emails. All right. I mean, I even get emails from people asking me about a PhD program at UNCW. We don't offer one. Right. So it's really clear that student didn't take any time to learn anything about us. Right. I'm typing an answer to Sarah's question about the personal statement and, in the chat box. And it's the same thing. It's find something that you can talk about the university that interests you. Do they have a center is a good example. Do they have, I'm really interested in marketing analytics. And let's say some university has a center for marketing analytics.
Or even customer delight.
Yeah, customer delight is a thing at UNCW. Talk about that. Let us know that you took, I mean, I'm being somewhat cynical, but let us know that you took 5 minutes to go to the website and learn something about the program. That just that little bit of effort can make a big difference. When I was applying for jobs as a graduating PhD, I found something interesting about every university that I applied to. And so when I wrote my letter, yes, they were all fairly similar, but I changed things in them every time to reflect the specific situation at that university, whether it be a center that they had, a faculty member doing research in a particular area, opportunities for international travel, whatever the case might be. It didn't take long, but it was much more successful than just blasting out this email. It's pretty clear to a faculty member when you get that email that it's just, oh, this person must have sent this email to 400 people.
But if you are overseas, Tariq, and you're doing your master's overseas, you're not going to probably be working in the U.S. You have to be in the U.S. to work in the U.S. Probably.
And I was going to say the same thing. It's not that you don't have, even though you're modestly and humbly saying that you've been involved in 11 publications, the research looks very, very strong. My concern, to echo Marcy's last comment, would be, I don't know what the visa situation would be like where you could come to the US just to be able to do some type of internship or applied learning experience, even if it is part of the curriculum in an ASU online program. You, just like most things, you need to be here to earn that experience, to earn that right, along with your classmates to have the opportunity for CPT, pre-completion OPT, or certainly post-completion OPT.
And we have answered all of the questions that we received. I just want to say thank you so much, Marcy, Michael, and Stephen, for sharing your expertise on different programs and sharing different examples and your own experiences. For those of you who are from the West Bank, please contact us via our email, ramallah@educationusa.org, if you would like to schedule an individual consultation or if you have any follow-up questions. If you are from a different country, please go to the Education USA website and contact the nearest Education USA advisor in your country. Thank Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day. Thank you, everyone.
Shukran
Bye.
kathir.
Bye.
Merci
Thank you.
bien. Au
And we're
revoir.
all still accepting students for January, so please apply, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sana.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marwa. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you all
Thanks for
so much.
organizing us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.